I could try to explain to you what this book is about. I could try to tell you some of the characters, but I'm going to leave that to our guest. Except for Bummer and Lazarus. If you're a fan of Emperor Norton, Bummer and Lazarus are back again. A couple of things about our signing tonight when it takes place. Chris will say and he will sign books, and he will sign all of the books you have, but he will only personalize two. So if you have more than one, pick two that you want to have personalized. And I'll be coming down the aisle with post-it notes, so you'll have your personalization when you get up here. No pictures, or no posed pictures anyway, if you guys want to grab a picture while you're up there, but there won't be any posed pictures, otherwise we'll be here for a long time tonight. So no posed pictures. And let's see, do I have anything else? And the people here who have multiple copies and are collectors who know this already, please wait at the back. So come up at the end of the line, and if anyone's here who is elderly or if you have kids, please allow them to come to the front of the line when we start the signing. I'm going to read one quick review of tonight's book. This is from the Washington Post. As you can imagine, we read a lot of reviews as event hosts here. This is one of the best ones I've read in a while. It says in part from the Washington Post, "Writing should be fun. More takes that to a whole new level. Weird, expletive-laden, wildly entertaining. You just can't make this stuff up." Wait for it. You just can't make this stuff up, but Christopher Moore can. Yeah. And let's see. So Christopher is the author of 14 previous novels, including, among others, Lamb, The Stupidest Angel, A Dirty Fool, Dirty Job, Fool, Sacre Bleu, and The Serpent of Venice, and my favorite, Lust Lizard of Melancholy Cove. When he's not writing, Chris enjoys ocean kayaking, scuba diving, photography, painting with acrylics and oils, and comes to us tonight from across the pond in San Francisco. Would you please do a nice big welcome to Christopher Moore?
Thank you for pretending I haven't been here for an hour. Walking around talking to everybody. And thank you all for coming, even knowing what to expect. I would like know all you guys. And thank you. So that's all my thanks part. I usually do that at the end. So you guys have probably heard me talk about, for an author, books are like his children. And if you're from a big family, you know that if you have enough children, then eventually one or two of them are just going to be fucking goofy. This is sort of my goofy child. Secondhand Souls is my goofy child. The first book was about death, was A Dirty Job, which I wrote because I thought I knew something about death. I had been taking care of my mother while she was dying of cancer, and then I helped my wife take care of her mother while she was dying of cancer, and so I thought I knew something about death and had something to say. But with this book, I didn't have as much direct experience with death. But my father died at 49, and my mother died at 60, and tomorrow I'll be 58. So if I'm not at death's door, I'm on death's porch. So that's what I figure I have some authority to write another book about death. And the difference when you start living on death's porch, I think, is, for instance, your fitness goals are different. When you go to join a gym when you're like 20 or 30 and the trainer asks you, what are your fitness goals? You say, well, I'd like to weigh this much or run a mile in this much time or bench press this much. And now it's just don't die. All my workouts are don't die. All my runs are runs from death. So the other thing that happens when you're on death's porch is your friends start to die. And my best friend from high school died about a year. I forgot we had this. There's people having dinner. Let's mess with it. Anyway, I wanted to cheer you up. My best friend from high school died about a year and a half ago. And I went back to Ohio to his funeral because well, that was the conditions under which I would go back to Ohio. If my best friend died. Other than that, no, because I escaped. But you know this guy because of The Stupidest Angel. In The Stupidest Angel, there's a concept called Christmas amnesty, wherein If you show up, if you fall out of contact with somebody, you don't answer their emails, you don't return their calls, you don't send them a Christmas card, and you don't visit or see them in a safe way, and then all of a sudden, 5 years can go by, and if you show up at their house at the holidays with a gift, they have to act like nothing happened. And that's Christmas amnesty. And my friend Keith was the person from whom that was inspired. Because when he went off to college, we sort of fell out of contact. And I showed up at his house about 3 years later with a 6-pack of Pepsi. I said, "Merry Christmas!" And he had to act like nothing happened. He didn't know that because I hadn't invented Christmas amnesty yet. But the Pepsi made sense because when we were kids, like 14, we would all hang out at his house because his parents would let us smoke. And his father's always saying, "Hey, why don't they bring their own Pepsis? They drink all our Pepsis. It's costing me a fortune, so here's your Pepsi for Christmas." Anyway, so we went out to coffee, which is what we had always done, and we went to a Denny's kind of place. And the waitress came over and she poured our coffee and she said, "Cream in your coffee?" And we both busted out laughing until we laughed until we couldn't breathe. That don't say anything funny. Don't say. Those of you who smoke weed know what I'm talking about. And because when we were kids, the joke was, "Cream in your coffee?" Not lately. So, when you're 14, that's the funniest joke there ever was. So I told that story at his funeral. You want some water? I have an extra one that I haven't spit in. Because the idea was this was why we were all sitting in that room to talk about this guy. There was a youth pastor there that really seemed very sad that he missed Keith's soul, but other than that, well, he was one of those guys that was one of those reformed junkie pimps types, and they're really what's the word I'm looking for? Adamant about their evangelism. And so he got up and told a story about basically dropping the ball and that, and anyway, so that's enough about my dead friend. I haven't done this for like a week, so I'm off my game. You guys don't know that. I'll cut that part out of the tape. The other thing that happens when you're living on death's porch is you start paying attention to the news and politics, which doesn't make any sense. Well, and basically you know that they're gearing all that programming towards you because all of the sponsors are medicines. And I don't really pay attention to what the medicines are for because I don't know if I have diabetic nerve pain or restless leg syndrome or postmenopausal painful boning, which is a condition, I guess. I might even have chronic dry eye, and I don't know if I have any of those things. But I do pay attention to the side effects that they list off at the end. Because it's like, okay, nervousness, anxiousness, sleeplessness, I have those all the time. Anal itching, okay. But when it gets to death or heart failure or increased heart failure, I'm like, huh? I'm paying attention. Because I don't care how badly I've got my truck stuck in the mud. And I'm unable to MacGyver my way into getting my 2 horses out of the trailer and hitching to the front of the truck to pull them out of the mud, which evidently I facilitate by taking this blue pill. If death is a symptom, I know it's a metaphor. I know I'm not actually talking about trucks and horses. But they can't show you the condition, otherwise it would just be the kids in the yard with Grandpa, and he'd be going, "A wiffle ball," and he'd go, "Throw the ball. Just throw the ball, it's okay. Just call the doctor if it goes on for more than 4 hours." But they can't tell you that. And you have to be, they say, ask your doctor if you're healthy enough for sex. And they mean physically. Because let's face it, if they meant emotionally, then like half of us wouldn't be here. Anyway, so right before I left on book tour about a month ago, they announced that they had, I won't say perfected, they had developed Lady Viagra, and the list of side effects was like 4 pages long, and the effect was, you might be a little horny. So I don't really know how well it's going to work. I don't know if death was one of those, but I do think that Ben and Jerry's should be able to name it. Because bitches love them some Ben and Jerry's. Chunky Monkey, Caramel Sutra, Boom Chocolate. That's a real flavor. I'll give you a minute to think about Ben and Jerry's flavors that you feel would be appropriate for an aphrodisiac. American Dream. Turtle cheesecake. No, turtle cheesecake. No. No, I know that wouldn't be one. But there was a politician, I think from North Carolina, who talked about man on turtle relation, and if you equate same-sex marriage with man on turtle relations, what you have is a latent turtle fucker on your hands. You've got somebody who's been thinking about it for a long time and sees a way to work it into the conversation. I'm just saying it's one of those, you know, we've got somebody saying, yeah, that's what's next, man on turtle? Yeah, well, that's what it is. So I read the symptoms, I listen for the symptoms of death's porch. And the other thing is, in general life, I was sitting in my office a few weeks ago and I smelled grilled cheese, and I was relatively sure I remembered that was a symptom for something. Well, so I Googled it because, I was in my office, and it turns out it is a symptom for something. That someone in your general proximity may be preparing a grilled cheese. But on page 2 of Google, which exists, it had a thing that burnt toast, the smell of burnt toast is a symptom for having a stroke. So I'm glad I looked that up. So, if you're on death's porch with me and you smell burnt toast, you could be having a stroke, or someone could have just been fiddling with the dark control of your toaster. So, and I'm just worried that I'm going to wake up one day and I'm going to think all this stuff they said on Fox and Friends makes sense. Yeah, everybody out of my exact demographic group is trying to take all my stuff. I should build a wall. Because that'll work. That's worked so well, and that worked so well in China in 800 BC, before they developed ladder technology. I know a fair amount of Latino guys, and they know how to work a ladder. Just saying. This might be my friends, but I don't think that's going to... I know that it's not just going to be a wall, it's also going to be drones, because that worked so well between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where we had 65,000 troops and the entire U.S. Air Force with a border that was 400 miles shorter than Mexico's border. And there was no job or Taco Bell on either side. So anyway, I'm worried that'll sound logical to me, and one day I'm going to go, yeah, let's have a narcissistic, insane billionaire be president. That's a great idea! But the whole point, I talked about that in Michigan a week ago, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I had never been before. And that got the disapproval. So, Marin County, they're out there. There are people who thought, that is a good idea. And my feeling is, it's just like Thelma and Louise going over the cliff holding hands, just like, we're not going to be around to see it, it'll be awesome! Anyway. So, I realized that that's what the way it manifests in the book is there's a lot of get off my lawn humor in Secondhand Souls, which you didn't find as much in A Dirty Job. For instance, the hellhounds are back, the 400-pound indestructible hellhounds that are brought to protect Sophie, the little girl. And I have them walking around North Beach eating comfort animals off of people's laps. I fly a lot, and I see the people with their comfort animals. that comfortable. They keep running up to the gate to see if they can get their comfort animal on, you know, so I'm not sure it's working. Before I left on tour, there's a picture in the paper of a woman's comfort kangaroo standing in the aisle. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
It's a thing. Somebody would agree with, yeah, it's a thing. And and it was like this big. I'm not a kangaroo expert. It might have been a wallaby, but it was, you know, a hoppy thing. And if I'm in the section with you and you've got your comfort kangaroo, I'm not that comfortable. I may have to take my 2 comfort dingoes on to make me comfortable with your comfort kangaroo, and then it just spirals out of it's a domino thing, which all of us on desk sports are worried about dominoes falling over for some reason. But you should be able to have comfort animals, but it should be universally one animal. A pigeon. Because if there's any animal that understands not wanting to fly, it's a pigeon. If you guys right now said to your comfort pigeon, let's go to New York, he'd go, oh, let's walk, it's not that far. Unless there was a kid going, ah, or a dog or something, otherwise they're not gonna do that. So, comfort pigeon. Also, if you crash in the snow-capped Andes, they'll taste much better than your fellow passengers. So, you got that going for you. I'm here with solutions. Like the wall thing, you know, I figure here's the solution, bipartisan. Say people want the wall, want the Keystone Pipeline. That goes from Canada to Houston. So you drop it another 300 miles to Mexico, you put a walkway across the top, some porta potties and some snack stations. Everybody from the southern border walks across the Keystone Bridge to the northern border. They're welcomed with a hockey stick syrup and how's it going, eh, go Leafs. And we don't even have to bother, it's a solution, everybody wins. It makes as much sense as what they were saying in the debate the other day. So the other thing, the other get off my lawn thing that I make fun of hipsters quite a bit. Not generically, but the guys in tiny clothes. If you guys have been to Hayes Valley, there's a lot of guys walking around that, like, if they were in 4th grade and wore that sweater, you'd go, oh, he grew out of it and his mom did it. So I call them the tiny sweater guys quite a bit. And they're going to be embarrassed by that at some point. I know, because I know there's a picture of me somewhere wearing 5-inch white platform shoes with disco pants on that may arise on the internet any day now, and I'm going to feel bad about it, you know? So are they about their tiny sweaters. I mean, even though they don't feel bad about it now, they'll look back and go, oh, well, that was stupid. I know myself, every 10 years, every decade, I look back at who I was the decade before, and I think, what a dumbass that guy was. Which speaks to the changing nature of the immortal soul. It was an awesome segment. Well, if you think about it, those of you who are people of faith, you believe that when you die, your soul goes to heaven. Well, is it the person you are right before you die? In which case, heaven is full of a bunch of elderly people complaining about their life. And, oh, that's horrible. And that's what you get for eternity. It's just, or is it the 19-year-old kid that wanted to build a life-size pyramid out of beer cans? Is that your immortal soul? Is somebody from the Hayes Valley going to have to walk around with a tiny sweater on? Will my white platform shoes be waiting for me? So there's got to be something that's eternal and permanent about us that transcends personality, and I talk about that in the book quite a bit, by way of puppets, which is really the best way to discuss anything, I think. I have another page of notes that I'll turn on. I don't have more material left. Oh, I know what it was. So we have this place up in the Redwoods where I go to write. This is my most recent encounter with death, near death, someone else's. I was, we have this place up in the Redwoods in Sonoma where I go when it gets too noisy in the city to write. And so I was up there right before I went on tour, and I was running around the parking lot is like exactly a quarter mile. So I would run around the parking lot because if you run out on the road in Sonoma, people will run over you because it's wine country and they're all take my word for it. So I was running from death around the parking lot, and my neighbor a couple doors down had died while I was going, a guy younger than me. And there was a white van there, and there was this elderly couple, and they were loading stuff down out of the apartment into the van. And I went by once, and I went by a second time, and I thought, I'm about to go out and yell at thousands of people for not stepping up and recognizing that part that's eternal in everybody, and when someone dies. And I've just walked by these people, twice. Well, ran slowly. So I went back and I went, I'm really sorry, you're Dan's family. I didn't know him very well, but he was in. She said, oh, no, we're not Dan's family. This is our job. We're hired by the family when someone dies to remove stuff from the apartment. And I went, can I get your card? And they sort of backed away. like maybe I had a monument of body parts built in my apartment, which as far as I know I did not. And I said, no, for my wife, because we needed to have the talk. Well, I remember her saying when I brought it up, what am I going to do with all these fucking books? And many have that same problem. And now we know there's people with a truck that'll come and get them. That's good. And I knew we had to have the talk, because she didn't have the talk with her mother when her mother got sick. We were in Hawaii at the time. Her mom was in San Diego. And one of the things they hadn't talked about was that her mother had converted to Catholicism in the intervening time since they'd seen each other. So when she showed up, her mom was sort of propped up in bed, and it was Ash Wednesday, and Charlie went in and went, Mom, you got something there on your forehead. Schwanz there. Can I get that for you? So you need to have the talk. That's what I was trying to say. And when I went in for we did a DNR. You guys know what that is? Do not resuscitate. So that nobody goes to extraordinary means to bring you back if something happens. And so I went in for my colonoscopy, and they put you under general anesthesia, and they let her come into the recovery room because it's not surgery or anything, you're just out. And so I was coming out of the general anesthesia, and I went back into the general anesthesia. She yanked the cord out of the wall, and I told him I wouldn't let him suffer. I said, you just unplugged my phone, sorry. I knew we needed to have the talk. Any questions? I missed a part. The thing that it's hard, I don't want to lecture you guys. This book is basically just goofy. So it's not preparing you for anything, it's just goofy. But one of the things that, in thinking about it, and Charlie worked in hospice for a couple of years, and so it sort of informed what I was doing, is that you have to be really present. And when you talk about the nature of the immortal soul, transcending personality, when someone's dying, you have to let a lot of stuff go. Like your uncle, who is like an insane dick at Thanksgiving, that was also the guy that taught you to bait a fish hook. So somewhere in there is that good guy that's beyond this horrible personality that's manifesting now. I'm not saying that's all of your uncles, but we all have that one. It's really, there's a scene in the first book in A Dirty Job where a woman is eating cheese, and that's all she's doing. She's about to die, basically. And Charlie, who's the main character of that book, and smaller, but the main character of this book, I left him stuck in a 14-inch meat puppet. It's one of the reasons I had to do a sequel, because he's a beta male and so am I, and so anyway. But you really have to sort of transcend that and be right there in the moment and let the resentments and things go. It's not a great way to end this, but you can say the only way, we're so used to talking about the future or talking about the past. I think having memories is okay with someone who's sick. But the future, what are you going to do? Grandma, who are you going to haunt? Which I think is really, really relatively good question to ask. Because you don't lose your sense of humor when you're sick, or when, I think that's one of the things we do, is we back up and we get afraid. And as much as I normally would leave you on a joke, but I'm off my timing, that's one of the things we can't do, is when someone says they're sick, you can't be afraid. I heard so many times when I was out touring for the first book of people who got diagnosed, not necessarily with something terminal, but just something uncomfortable, and their friends just like roaches under the fridge, and at my house. And you have to step up, and then you have to sort of set that trigger for yourself, so that when something happens, whether somebody loses something or whether someone's diagnosed sick, you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to turn into the skid. The same way that you set a trigger for yourself to say, this is the proper if-then situation. Like the 3 guys on the train in France that stopped the terrorists. They had already thought out that was going to happen before that ever happened. That's how they knew what to do, is they went, if this happens, I will do this. And what we have to do is say, if I'm faced with this very uncomfortable thing, I need to step up. I need to say, I'm sorry, is there anything I can do, and mean it. And it's really tough. The easiest thing to do is just act like you don't know about it, and disappear. But we owe that part of each of us that's eternal that much respect. And it will be, I think, the measure of most of our characters, because most of us aren't going to dive into the freezing waters to save the crashed plane passengers, and most of us aren't going to go over the top and save our buddy who's under enemy fire, and most of us aren't going to run into a burning building and save a kid, but every one of us is going to face death many times in different forms in our life, and that's when we know to step up. We know the measure of our character at that point. So just set that switch, and man, I'm done yelling at you. Now, any questions? Seriously, any questions? Yeah, sure.
I read several of your books, and one of my favorite is Island of the Secret Nun. Where did you come up with this?
She was saying I'm awesome, and she read Island of the Sequin Love Nun, and where do I come up with things like that? I went to Ohio State for a little while, and I was kind of an anthro major, as much as you can be a major in your freshman year. I took all the anthro courses I could. And one of the cool things I learned about was cargo cults, wherein people, sort of Aboriginal people on the islands in the Pacific during World War II were visited by these flying boat pilots, these reconnaissance pilots, and sometimes even bomber pilots, who came in and said, well, here's a machete, here's a cigarette lighter, here's some chocolate, you're the Americans' friends, we'll be back. And then they took off and flew away, And they, if you give a person who lives in a Stone Age culture a machete or a knife, you have significantly improved their life. And so what happened, they found out years later, is that these cults had risen that said, that basically worshipped the pilots of these planes and said that they will return, because their original culture isn't like most cultures that have a creation myth. If you go to the Egyptians, all the mainland cultures, there's a creation myth. Island cultures, they don't. They have, our ancestors brought things from somewhere else. Their culture has always been based on something coming from somewhere else. And so to have a religion that they would return somewhere else, that still exists today in what do they call New Hebrides now? Vanuatu, and in that area of the world, there are still cults. The John Frum cult is thousands of people who are waiting for this pilot to return with cargo. And so that's what I thought, well, I want to go scuba diving in the Pacific. What do I know that would make that a cool story about that? And so the cargo cult thing was something I did. If I had really done it right, I would have ended up in the New Hebrides instead of where I went in Micronesia. I went to Micronesia because when I was a waiter, one of the guys who came to the bar at the restaurant where I worked would always come in and talk about all these goofy things, because Micronesia had been an American protectorate since World War II. So it was a lot of American influence and we'd pull out, and American influence and we'd pull out. And so the Americans would say, okay, we're going to build a bunch of roads on this island. And they wouldn't, there were no cars, but they would, and they hired a Korean company to come in and build the roads. And the name of the Korean company on the side of the truck translated into truckees as Big Dick. And so whenever a truck would go by, all the natives would crack up and laugh and stuff. And I thought, I have to go to that place. So it was basically just trying to, sort of piece all that together. And I wanted to write in that dialect, that Damon Runyon-like dialect, in which there's only one chapter in that book, but there's also like 2 chapters in this book that is that sort of tough guy 1940s way of talking. And that was one of the reasons I wrote it. So you know, you just get the ideas where I know a cool thing about a thing, you know, and that's how I usually approach research, is not how much can I get in there, but what's a cool thing that I know about that, and I put that. Other question? Sure.
My favorite books of yours are The Stupidest Angel and The Lust Lizard of Melancholy Cove. And like, I love that setting of in Pine Cove with those familiar characters. Do you ever think you'll write another book with that same setting?
The Pine Cove books are awesome, she said. Will I ever write another book set there? Probably not, because when I wrote those books, I was living in Cambria, which is, you know, by Hearst Castle, and it sort of is the analog for Pine Cove. And so if I had, you know, the first book is set in Pine Cove, perhaps with the Immocated. If I had to do a book and I didn't have time to go somewhere to do research, or I didn't have any money to go somewhere to do research, I would write a book set in Pine Cove because it was where I live. Well, now I live in San Francisco, so basically when I'm up against a deadline, I'll set a book in San Francisco rather than, you know, Pine Cove. So I don't think so. Also, those characters have like gotten really old. Yeah, just have to have everybody, you know, all the chase scenes with walkers. Writing this book, I bring Minty Fresh back, which some of you may be familiar with. He's, you know, I created him in 1992. And I was thinking, wow, he's not a spring chicken anymore, you know. And I had to actually address that. I was like, I like my characters to just stay the same age, but you know, like Travis McGee was the same age for like 50 years, you know. James Bond was the same age for like 50 years. Fortunately, they're letting him age in the movies. But anyway, so probably not is the answer. But you can reread those. Any other questions? Sure.
When I was at the Edwardian Ball, I met the woman who makes the squirrels.
Monique.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was
Motel.
amazing. So
Yeah.
were you inspired by those, or had you already thought of it? And
No, I didn't. We were just talking about it. Bob, who used to drive me when I was in the Bay Area before I lived here. There's a gallery on Valencia called Paxton's Gate, and it's like dead animal parts and plants and dead animals and dead animals, but they're pretty. And we were wandering around down there, and I was thinking about writing A Dirty Job, and you know, a book about death, and we go in there, and there's these creatures that are made out of disparate animal parts, chicken feet and raccoon hands and bobcat skulls, and then these really extraordinary costumes from all different periods. And I thought, well, those have got to go in the book. And they become the squirrel people in both books, and human souls are sort of placed into them by this Buddhist nun. But yeah, I found out who made them, and it's a lady named Monique Motil, who still lives in San Francisco, and she's the costumer for Beach Blanket Babylon. So if you've ever seen those hats, you know what I'm talking about. And she had done it for the same reason that I have Audrey do it, is that she wanted to make all these ornate costumes, but the material was extraordinarily expensive. But if you only made them this big, you could make a bunch of different ones, and that's what she did. And then she would, you know, go to Chinatown and buy animal parts, or evidently there's a dead animal parts store that she told me about. So, and she has a collection, which is why we've never gone to her house. But yeah, she gave me permission to put them in the book, and it was just, it's worked out great. I mean, she since then she's making Bob, the Bobcat guy, the sport guy now. You know, she said, I'm almost done with Bob, I just need to get a sport. And I go, I have a sport. Yeah, she definitely, her work inspired the book for sure. Or inspired those characters for sure. And I got her permission before I used them. So, anyone else? Anyone? Sure.
Well, what's next, and will we ever get to see Pocket again?
What's next, and interesting you should put it that way. What's next, and will we ever get to see Pocket again? Well, it was going to be another book about Pocket, but my publisher said no. Yeah. So we may have to fire them. So what it's going to be is a noir-style mystery set in San Francisco in 1947. And again, it's going to be mainly for me, the same way the Pocket books are where I get to play around with Elizabethan language. This is going to be playing around with tough guy, you know, mid-century language that runs from about the 20s to the 50s. And all I know about it really is the first line is, she had the kind of legs that kept her butt from sitting on her shoes. We're gonna decide books if you guys don't have any more questions. Yes, sure, Dan.
Can you go in and pitch for the Giants? Because you're healthy.
I cannot throw a baseball nor catch a baseball, but I can wear this jersey and feel the hatred coming off the people all over the country. It's funny, when I was in LA, I was like, I'm not gonna wear the jersey. Makes a lot of sense. It's been very hot, and it really is sort of not a hot thing to wear. And plus, you can wash it in the sink if you need to.
Right.
But when I got to LA, I was like, I'm gonna wear something else. So I wore my Flying Squirrels jersey because they don't know. And I'm secretly there for the Giants. But they're like, no, it's a squirrel thing. Let's not beat him to death. Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry, yeah.
What book would you like to read that has not yet been written?
What book would I like to read that has not been written? You mean by me or by somebody else?
Anyone or you?
The third book in the Cannery Row series by John Steinbeck? Yeah, that's what I want someone to find that manuscript somewhere. So, any other questions?
Yes.
No? Thank you for coming, you guys. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.